Welcome back to the deep dive, where we take these huge, complex stacks of information and, well, we distill them down into what you really need to know.
Glad to be here.
So today, we are tackling something our sources are calling the triple brain epidemic. And it's a pretty intense crisis. It's cutting across every demographic, impacting millions and costing trillions.
It's a massive, and I mean immediate, drain on human capacity.
You're...
When we talk about this triple threat, we're really looking at three crises that overlap.
Okay, what are they?
First, you've got mental illness that affects over 60 million Americans every single year.
60 million.
Then there's the second one, the rapidly accelerating problem of cognitive decline. Globally, that's projected to cost $1 trillion in care.
Wow.
And finally, digital overload. It's this, pervasive cognitive fragmentation that something like 70% of workers now report suffering from.
That's a really stark picture. And historically, our response has just been so fragmented, so episodic. And I think this is the key. It's often critically too late. So our mission in this deep dive is to really understand this seismic shift that's happening right now. We're moving from that disconnected, reactive model to something continuous, a self-optimizing, closed-loop system for brain health. And it's powered by voice and sound.
The closed-loop revolution, it's all about continuous feedback. I mean, think of it this way. You have a system where a measurement immediately informs an intervention.
And then the results of that intervention automatically refine what comes next.
Precisely. We're not just trying to make existing treatments a little bit better. We're fundamentally changing what kind of outcomes are even possible for the brain.
Okay, so the challenge is moving from that general idea to a specific repeatable application. The best example we have of this kind of closed-loop transforming medicine, it actually comes from diabetes management.
A field that really mastered continuous data.
Okay, let's unpack this. Before all this continuous data, diabetes care was, it relied on these periodic, painful fingerstick measurements, right? And manual injections. It was a completely open loop.
A purely open loop. The patient was constantly reacting, and they were reacting to old information.
Right.
The real game changer was combining the continuous glucose monitor, the CGM, with an automated insulin pump. That created what we call a hybrid closed-loop system.
Which is just a marvel of automation. It essentially took the burden of orchestration completely off the patient.
It did, and the clinical results are they're staggering.
The sources show this automated process boosts the time patients are in their target glucose range from, 50 or 60% with the old manual tracking?
Right, up to 70 or even 80%. And even more importantly for safety, it cuts down those dangerous hypoglycemia incidents by a massive 40 to 60%.
That's incredible.
And that is the principle. I measure continuously, you intervene based on that real-time data, you reassess to see if it worked, and then you just keep refining the whole process.
So if we apply that exact principle to brain health, you start to realize how primitive our current approach is.
It's entirely open loop. We're basically operating in the dark.
With totally disconnected measurements. Traditional cognitive tests, for instance, they're like a single episodic finger prick. They only detect mild cognitive impairment, or MCI, with about 65% sensitivity.
And that's where the real cost of this fragmentation shows up. If 65% is your ceiling, think about the 35% of people you're missing.
Right, during that key intervention window.
Exactly. They just move toward late-stage crisis management. The window for a truly effective preventative intervention for something like Alzheimer's, it closes years before you ever get a formal diagnosis.
And it's worse because even when we do intervene, it's so generic. Sound therapies, cognitive exercises, they're just delivered without any biomarker feedback to guide them.
And in mental health, I mean, think about it. Antidepressants are prescribed without any continuous physiological biomarkers. Fewer than 20% of therapists consistently use measurement-based care between their sessions.
So we're just relying on these little snapshots that completely miss the day-to-day, even hour-to-hour fluctuations that actually govern mood and cognition.
Right. So a closed-loop system in neuroscience, it has to integrate continuous physiological sensing, your actual moment-to-moment state, with interventions delivered based on that state. And then you need real-time reassessment.
You mentioned responsive neurostimulation for epilepsy.
RNS, yeah. It's a perfect example.
So that device, it doesn't just stimulate continuously, does it?
No, absolutely not. It only delivers therapy when specific neural signatures predict that a seizure is imminent.
And that specificity works.
It achieved over a 40% seizure reduction, precisely because it restricts that electrical stimulation to the moments of actual need. It saves energy and it maximizes the effect. That's the gold standard.
And that's the principle we need for general brain health. optimizing function, but only when sensing shows it's actually required.
Okay, so that makes the timing, the temporal complexity, the key challenge here. Brain states fluctuate way faster than glucose levels, which change over hours.
They change over minutes, sometimes seconds.
So why are voice and sound so uniquely suited to handle this really rapid, continuous loop that the brain needs? It really comes down to two things: temporal compatibility and zero friction. Voice is often called the fifth vital sign for a reason.
Because it captures state, changes mood, cognitive load, fatigue in just minutes.
In minutes, exactly. And then therapeutic audio, it can deliver neuromodulation that actually takes effect in about 20 minutes. So they're perfectly aligned. They're the ideal sensing and intervention pair.
So if voice is the sensor, walk me through the tech details. What is the system actually listening for beyond just the words I'm saying?
So voice is this incredibly rich biomarker, and it's captured passively just from natural speech. The system is analyzing acoustic features, linguistic characteristics, and even your respiratory patterns.
When you say acoustic features, what do you mean?
We're talking about fundamental frequency, and then, crucially, things like jitter and shimmer.
Okay, hold on. Jitter and shimmer sounds super technical. Can you break down what those two specifically tell us about someone's brain state?
Of course, jitter and shimmer are just tiny microscopic variations in your voice. Jitter is pitch perturbation, and shimmer is amplitude perturbation.
And what does that signal?
We know they correlate directly with neurological stability, with fatigue, with emotional arousal. They're basically digital fingerprints of your autonomic nervous system.
So it's reflecting the stability of the laryngeal motor cortex.
Exactly. And this is critical data you're gathering without the user ever having to stop and fill out some subjective survey. It's just continuous.
And then the sound itself acts as the medicine. So what are the actual neurophysiological mechanisms at play here?
Sound is a direct neurophysiological modulator. This is not just, background music. The core cycle is continuous and simple. Voice detects a state shift.
Sound delivers a personalized intervention.
Then voice reassesses the immediate physiological response.
And the system refines its whole approach.
And the brilliance of it is that it's passive, which gets around the single biggest hurdle we face in wellness.
And that brings up such a critical point, this friction analogy. We know people fail to stick with wellness regimens, diet, meditation, exercise, you name it, because the effort to manage it all,
The cognitive load.
the cognitive load of orchestrating it becomes the biggest barrier. So the closed loop has to eliminate that demand for willpower.
Absolutely. Trying to, manually combine a separate voice tracking app on a sound therapy app fails for the exact same reason that manually logging your blood sugar failed decades ago.
Because the cognitive resources you need to organize your own care, your attention, your willpower are the very resources that are already depleted by this triple brain epidemic.
The technology has to work passively. It has to be automatic. If the user has to stop, interpret the data, and then select an intervention, the system is dead on arrival. The closed loop removes the burden of orchestration entirely.
That framing, removing the burden of orchestration, that's so key. Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Let's dive into those specific scientific interventions. How does sound work directly on the electrical substrate of the brain?
We have really compelling evidence across three major scientifically validated pathways. First up is vagal activation.
The vagus nerve.
Right. Specific low-frequency vibroacoustic tones, usually in the range of 30 to 120 hertz, are delivered non-invasively. They stimulate the vagus nerve, and by doing that, they rapidly shift the entire autonomic nervous system towards the parasympathetic.
The rest and digest state.
Exactly.
And how quickly does that shift happen? Is it immediate?
It's incredibly fast. Studies show that just 20 minutes of this kind of stimulation can measurably increase your heart rate variability, or HRV.
Which is the key metric for that parasympathetic tone.
It is. It can increase it by 15 to 25%. And on the flip side, it reduces stress markers like the stress hormone cortisol and also inflammatory markers like IL-6 and TNF-alpha.
So it's an immediate passive shift away from that chronic fight-or-flight stress state.
Correct. The second pathway, and this one is it's revolutionary in its potential, is neural entrainment, specifically targeting the 40 hertz gamma rhythm.
Gamma rhythms are the fastest brain oscillations, right? They're critical for attention, memory.
Exactly. Complex processes like attention, sensory processing, forming new memories. And the tragic thing we've observed is that disruptions in these rhythms happen decades before clinical Alzheimer's symptoms ever appear.
Right, and we've seen the sources referencing the MIT research here. That work showed that sound could actually change the underlying disease pathology, not just, mask the symptoms.
That's the breakthrough. They exposed Alzheimer's mouse models to 40 hertz auditory tones, and it reduced the amyloid beta plaques, the hallmark of the disease, by 30 to 50% in key memory regions like the hippocampus.
That is not just masking symptoms.
No, that is disease modification.
But, disease modification is a huge claim. What are the current limitations of that 40 hertz research? Are we mainly seeing this in mouse models, or are human trials showing similar promise?
And that's a warranted skepticism. We're still in the early stages of human translation, but the underlying mechanism is robust. The auditory stimulation activates the brain's immune cells, the microglia, and in training them at 40 hertz just makes them clear out those pathological proteins much more efficiently.
So the promise is that if we can maintain that clearance over decades, we can potentially delay or even prevent onset.
That's the goal. Which brings us to the third pathway, sleep optimization.
Okay, so tell us how sound makes sleep better without waking you up. That seems counterintuitive.
It uses closed-loop acoustic stimulation, so it involves using these miniature earphones to time sound pulses precisely to coincide with the upstate of your slow-wave oscillations.
Your deepest, most restorative sleep rhythms.
Exactly. It acts like a neural amplifier, just boosting that restorative activity without ever disturbing the sleeper.
And the data on memory consolidation from this is pretty compelling.
Highly compelling. This passive intervention improved memory consolidation by 40% in younger adults. And critically, it also improved it by 25% in older adults, aged 60 to 84.
All while they were completely asleep.
All while they were asleep.
I remember the sources mentioning the glymphatic system here. And for you listening, we should just emphasize, this is essentially the brain's powerful waste clearance system. It's like running the garbage disposal. But it happens mostly during that deep, slow wave sleep.
Precisely. The glymphatic system is what clears out metabolic waste, including those toxic amyloid beta and tau proteins.
Right.
So if you can enhance slow-wave sleep architecture throughout your midlife, your 40s, 50s, 60s, before irreversible pathology takes hold, you're creating a continuous neuroprotective effect that just compounds over the years.
So sound really gives you this powerful dual advantage. It can treat existing challenges, stress, poor focus, memory deficits, and it offers passive, scalable prevention during that massive 20-year preclinical window for conditions like Alzheimer's. Speaking of prevention, we have to address this more modern version of cognitive decline, the brain rot epidemic. The numbers are just jarring, with Gen Z now showing cognitive decline symptoms in their 20s.
It's the cost of chronic context switching. They're spending 7 or more hours a day on screens.
And context switching over 300 times a day.
300 times. That continuous low-level fragmentation, it just degrades executive function, memory, emotional regulation.
The Lancet Commission found that 40% of cognitive decline is preventable. But for this generation, the main modifiable factor isn't just diet or exercise. It is their fundamental relationship with technology.
And the solution can't just be try harder. Willpower is the one resource this generation has already spent.
That's the absolute crux of the problem. The traditional tech industry, what we'll call the extraction model, it's built to maximize time on screen, to maximize ad impressions.
So the closed loop requires a radical new metric, something that completely inverts that entire incentive structure. And that metric is return on attention, or ROA.
How exactly do you define and quantify ROA in this new system?
ROA measures the value you create, which we can define by 3 pillars of flourishing: connection, work, and peace, relative to the attention you invest.
And that attention invested critically includes the high cognitive switching costs.
It has to. So if a feature or behavior you're engaged in sustains an ROA below a certain threshold, let's say 0.15, the system sees that interaction as value destructive, and it immediately triggers a positive intervention.
So the goal shifts to a flourishing model. Retention and revenue are maximized not by maximizing addiction, but by maximizing actual user improvement and well-being.
Which requires specialized hardware. The sources introduce UHI-RA, this ear-worn AI companion.
Right. Why is the ear the ideal spot for both sensing and intervention?
It's the ultimate non-invasive location for that dual function. For sensing, you have a rich vascular system right there for biometrics like heart rate variability. You can capture micro-EEG signals from the scalp for cognitive state awareness, and of course the continuous voice biomarkers.
And then for intervention?
For intervention, you've got a direct pathway. High-fidelity bone conduction audio, spatial sound for 40 hertz entrainment, haptic feedback. It gets you right to the auditory cortex and the nervous system.
And this hardware is powered by an operating system called SOUL, Symbiotic Optimization with User Liberty. It runs a specialized 8-agent network. That sounds complicated. Which of those agents are most critical for solving this digital brain rot problem?
Well, the power is in the specialization and the coordination of that network. You need the emotional cognitive agent, which is your moment-to-moment brain rot detector, sensing stress and cognitive load. You need the digital wellness agent, which is the ROA optimizer that applies that positive friction against low ROA behaviors. And then, most critically, you need the holistic orchestrator.
Okay, let's talk about the orchestrator. How does it manage all that complexity? Like, what happens if the digital wellness agent wants you focused on work, but the sleep agent sees you're chronically sleep deprived and need peace?
That is the orchestrator's core job, preventing these decline cascades.
Hmm.
So if the sleep agent flags dangerously low sleep quality, the orchestrator overrides the digital wellness agent's desire for productivity.
It detects the constraint.
It detects the constraint, the sleep deficit, and it implements solutions to optimize recovery. Maybe it suggests a scheduled neuroentrainment session later that day, and it suppresses demands that would just deplete your resources further. It prioritizes the foundation of health over just immediate task completion.
Okay, let's ground this with a concrete example.
Mm-hmm.
How does this closed loop work in real time during something like doom scrolling, a sustained low ROA activity?
So the system detects, through voice acoustics in your biometrics, that you've been in a sustained low ROA value-destructive state. It acts gradually. After, say, 2 minutes, the scroll physics might get subtly heavier. A little bit of positive friction.
Okay.
After 8 minutes, the Yuhiori companion might whisper, "You seem stuck on this loop. Would you like a brief cognitive reset?"
And what if the user just ignores that and keeps scrolling?
If you persist to 15 minutes, you get a full intervention. Maybe a visual breathe overlay combined with therapeutic 40 Hz guided breathing audio through the earbuds. And crucially, the system learns what interventions actually work for you.
So it adapts.
It adapts. If you consistently respond to a haptic pulse, but you always ignore the visual overlays, the orchestrator refines its approach. Next time, the haptic pulse becomes the preferred intervention for your specific profile. That's adaptive wellness, in real time.
So what does this all mean?
It means we are on the cusp of transforming brain health, from an expensive, late-stage reactive effort into proactive, population-scale prevention.
The contrast is pretty stark.
I mean, consider it. New Alzheimer's drugs cost $26,500 a year, and they only work for a tiny fraction of eligible patients because of infrastructure gaps. The closed-loop approach is scalable, passive, affordable, and it works continuously in the background to stabilize and optimize your cognition before pathology even begins. It turns brain health from crisis management into continuous optimization.
The fundamental challenge this whole closed loop solves is one we all face every single day: the willpower problem. The real power of this system is that it delivers its benefits passively. It works directly on the electrical substrate that generates your cognitive capacity rather than requiring that already depleted capacity, the willpower and attention we don't have left, to initiate the cure.
It works with your biology, not against your behavior.
Exactly. So if technology is the primary driver of this brain rot epidemic, what does it mean when the solution requires a fundamentally new kind of technology? One whose core business model is to give you back your attention rather than extract it. The closed loop is coming, and it forces a choice between extraction and flourishing.